The smell of Clara's perfume, a sweet blend of jasmine and vanilla, still clung to the fabric of the sofa, a ghost in the otherwise silent apartment. It had been days since she'd left, but the scent was stubborn, a constant reminder of her presence, or rather her absence. I walked through the small living room, past the bookshelf with the one novel she'd started and never finished, and into the bedroom. Her side of the closet stood mostly empty, a few hangers swinging uselessly in the stale air. A silk scarf, forgotten or intentionally left behind, lay draped over a drawer pull, its color faded now in the dim light. I ran a hand over the smooth fabric. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind to what was happening right in front of me? The signs must have been there, subtle shifts in the wind, but I was too caught up in the current to notice. It all started at Mike's house party, a standard Saturday night gathering for the guys from the office in their assorted plus ones. Programmers and developers mostly, talking about server architecture and the latest API integrations. I was in my usual spot, leaning against the kitchen counter, nursing a pale ale. The hum of conversation was a low drone, the clinking of glasses a steady rhythm. I watched, rather than participated, content to observe the ebb and flow of small talk and forced laughter. That was my way. Predictable. Safe. Then Clara walked in. She wore a dress the color of a summer sky, and even across the crowded room, her confidence was a tangible thing. She wasn't just walking, she was gliding, her eyes scanning the faces with an easy assurance that drew people to her. I watched her make her way through a cluster of engineers, laughing at something one of them said, before her gaze settled on me. I instinctively straightened, a reflex I hadn't known I possessed. She moved with purpose, straight through the small groups, until she was standing in front of me. "You're Ethan, right?" Her voice was clear, direct. "Mike told me about you. Said you're the coding wizard, the one who can untangle any mess of bad logic." She smiled, a genuine open smile that reached her eyes. A true superpower, apparently. I mumbled something about just doing my job. Most people, faced with my awkwardness, would drift away, but Clara stayed. We talked for what felt like hours, leaning against the counter, the party fading into background noise. She asked about my work, my hobbies, things I usually kept tucked away. I found myself sharing details about the obscure sci-fi novels I read, the intricate satisfaction of debugging a complex program, the quiet solitude I preferred. She listened, really listened, her head tilted slightly, her eyes never leaving mine. It was unsettling and exhilarating all at once. I hadn't felt that kind of attention before. "I don't usually talk this much," I admitted, surprised by my own openness. She just shrugged. "You seem like a good listener, and I'm a good talker. It works." She reached into her small purse, pulling out a business card, but instead of handing it to me, she flipped it over. "Here," she said, scribbling a number on the back with a pen she found. "Text me. We should do this again, but somewhere quieter." And so we did. Coffee, then dinner. Long walks by the lake on crisp autumn evenings. My life, which had previously run on a carefully coded loop of work, gym, and solitary evenings, suddenly had an unexpected, vibrant thread woven through it. Clara was a whirlwind of spontaneity. One weekend, she'd suggest a drive to some small town an hour away just to see its antique shops. The next, she dragged me to a live music show, a genre I'd never considered before. Mike noticed the change. "Never seen you smile like that, Ethan," he'd commented one afternoon in the break room, a knowing look in his eye. "She's good for you." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Clara's energy was intoxicating, a constant current that pulled me along. But there were glimpses, small flashes, of something else. One time she booked a last-minute trip to Miami, a long weekend at a luxury hotel, after a particularly stressful week at her job. "It's what I need," she'd said, already packing her bags. "You're still young, you need to live a little." I'd tried to gently bring up the strain on our combined savings. She just waved her hand, dismissing it. "Money is just paper, Ethan. You can't take it with you." Another time I'd suggested we sit down and map out a budget, just to see where things were going. She looked at me, a faint shadow crossing her face. "Why do you always have to be so serious?" she'd asked, her voice light but with an edge I didn't recognize. Don't you want to enjoy life? I'm trying to help you loosen up, remember? I told myself she was right. She was just teaching me how to be less rigid, how to embrace the moment. That's what I told myself, every time. 8 months had gone by since Mike's party. The vibrant newness of our relationship had settled into a comfortable routine, punctuated by Clara's bursts of unpredictable energy. Then the phone rang, a Tuesday afternoon, while I was deep in a debugging session. It was Clara, and her voice was thin, choked. They laid me off, Ethan. The words were barely a whisper, followed by a shaky breath. Budget cuts, they said, just like that. Gone. My code, intricate and demanding, suddenly seemed trivial. I closed my laptop, the screen reflecting my own worried face. I'm coming over, I said, not asking, just stating. I hung up before she could protest. The drive to her apartment, usually a 15-minute commute, felt endless. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. I ran through scenarios in my head, trying to prepare myself for what I'd find. Her apartment, typically a bright and airy space, felt heavy when I walked in. The blinds were drawn, casting the room in a dull, muted light. Clara was curled on the sofa, a blanket pulled up to her chin, her usually neat hair disheveled. A bottle of inexpensive Cabernet, half empty, stood on the coffee table beside her, two smudged wine glasses nearby. Her eyes, usually so bright, were red-rimmed and swollen. She looked small, vulnerable, not the confident woman who had walked into Mike's party. It's true, she murmured, her voice still raw. My boss, he just called me into his office. 15 minutes later, I was out. She gestured vaguely at the room. And my lease is up next month. I can't afford to renew it. Not now. She buried her face in her hands, a shudder running through her shoulders. What am I going to do, Ethan? The question hung in the air, heavy and immediate. My mind raced, not with logic or careful consideration, but with a surge of something primal. A protective instinct. Seeing her so broken, so lost, triggered an impulse I hadn't known I possessed. The words were out of my mouth before I'd fully formed the thought. Move in with me. She slowly lifted her head, her eyes, white and glistening, meeting mine. For a moment, she just stared, as if unsure she'd heard me right. Then, a wave of profound relief washed over her face, followed by a look of overwhelming gratitude. Her lips trembled as she tried to form a smile. She simply nodded, a silent acceptance that resonated deep within me. In that moment, watching her face soften with unspoken thanks, I felt it. I felt like a hero. It was a powerful, intoxicating feeling. Over the next few days, we carefully packed her things. My one-bedroom apartment, a monument to functional simplicity with its neutral tones and minimalist furniture, slowly began to transform. Her boxes held an explosion of color. Bright throw pillows in shades of turquoise and coral, a collection of intricately patterned scarves, a stack of vibrant art prints. Her small, distressed wooden bookshelf, painted a cheerful robin's egg blue, found a place next to my dark oak one. Even her mismatched coffee mugs, each one unique and brightly painted, stood out against my uniform white ceramic set. The space, once just mine, was now ours, filled with her personality. It felt livelier. As we sorted through her clothes, she talked about her plans. I'll update my resume, she'd said, pulling out a silk blouse, and I'll start sending out applications first thing next week. I've got some contacts from my old job I can reach out to. She sounded determined, but the tremor in her voice was still there. I put an arm around her, trying to be reassuring. Take your time, I told her, genuinely meaning it. Don't rush into anything. Find something that's a good fit. I can handle things for a while. I saw it as a temporary measure, a bridge to get her back on her feet. My job was stable, my savings decent. I could absorb the extra costs without much trouble for a few months, at least. And so the new arrangement began. I paid the rent, the utilities, the internet. The grocery bills, which had always been lean for one person, grew significantly. I even covered her car payment when she mentioned it was due. It was just a phase, I told myself. A bump in the road. She needed my support now, and I was more than willing to give it. 3 weeks after Clara moved in, I left work early. It was a Friday, and I'd planned a small surprise. a bottle of her favorite Cabernet and ingredients for a pasta dish I knew she liked. The thought of finding her home, maybe reading or watching something, made the idea of an early start to the weekend appealing. I imagined her smile, the easy warmth that had drawn me to her. The apartment was quiet when I opened the door. "Clara?" I called out, but only silence answered. My keys jingled as I placed them on the small table by the door. On the coffee table, her laptop sat open, a bright rectangle in the dim living room. I moved closer, my eyes naturally drawn to the screen. It wasn't a job board. It wasn't LinkedIn. Instead, half a dozen tabs glowed with images of designer shoes, a silk scarf from a boutique I recognized as expensive, and an art print I'd seen her admire in a glossy magazine. Multiple online shopping carts, already populated, stared back at me. Below them, another tab showed a social media feed, endless scrolling images of perfectly curated lives. A knot formed in my stomach. I stood there for a long minute, just looking. The Cabernet bottle felt heavier in my hand. I quietly moved to the kitchen, putting away the groceries. About an hour later, the door opened. "Ethan, you're home early." Clara's voice was bright, a little breathless. She walked into the living room, her arms laden with shopping bags. I recognized the logos immediately, the exact stores I'd seen open on her laptop screen. "Yeah, I thought I'd surprise you," I said, trying to keep my voice even. I watched her drop the bags onto the sofa, a slight flush on her cheeks. "Anything good?" She rummaged through a bag. "Just a few things. Needed a new top and this candle smelled divine." She pulled out a delicate, expensive-looking blouse in a ceramic jar. "So how was your day?" Mine was exhausting. All those applications, you know? And then I had to grab a coffee with Sarah from my old team, just for some networking. You'd be surprised how much energy these networking lunches take. She sighed dramatically, collapsing onto the sofa next to her bags. I swallowed, the taste in my mouth a little bitter. "Any leads?" I asked, pushing down the urge to mention the laptop screen. She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, just planting seeds. It's a long game, but I sent out another 5 applications today." "That's progress, right?" She looked at me, a hopeful, tired look, and I found myself nodding. "Right," I said. "That's good. You should take a break." Maybe that's all it was, I rationalized. A well-deserved break after a tough day of networking. Days bled into weeks, weeks stretched into months. The apartment still hummed with her presence. Her colorful things still brightened the space. The networking continued, punctuated by casual mentions of grabbing coffee or meeting up with old colleagues. But the calls for interviews never seemed to come. The enthusiastic updates about planting seeds grew less frequent, replaced by a vague sense of busyness that never quite connected to a job. One evening, after another quiet dinner that I had cooked, I decided to gently broach the subject. "Clara," I began carefully, "have you heard back from anyone recently? Any promising leads?" She was scrolling on her phone, humming a tune. At my question, her fingers stilled, her shoulders tensed. She slowly put the phone down, her gaze hardening. "Ethan," she said, her voice tight, "do you have any idea how soul-crushing this market is right now? It's absolutely brutal out there. Everyone's looking for a miracle worker, and nobody wants to take a chance on someone who was let go for budget cuts." The words came out in a rush, laced with an irritation I hadn't heard directed at me before. "It's not like I'm sitting around doing nothing, you know. It's emotionally draining." I immediately backed off. The moral tension in the air was palpable, and I felt myself shrink. I didn't want to upset her, not when she was already struggling. I wanted to be supportive. "No, of course not," I quickly corrected myself. "I just meant, I'm here to help, that's all." I started clearing the plates, the clinking sounds loud in the sudden silence. I focused on making sure the kitchen was spotless, giving her space, trying to soothe the unspoken friction with quiet domesticity. The credit card statements started arriving, thicker than before, a subtle but insistent physical manifestation of a growing problem. I'd scan them quickly at first, then more slowly, my finger tracing line after line of charges I didn't recognize. Another boutique, a hair salon I knew was expensive, multiple restaurant tabs, far more than our usual quiet dinners at home. Clothing, cosmetics. Each charge was small on its own, easily dismissed, but together they added up, creating a steady, unnerving drain. One evening after the third statement arrived with similar patterns, I laid them out on the kitchen table. My heart pounded a little faster than usual. "Clara," I began, my voice carefully neutral, "can we talk about these?" I pushed the statements across the table toward her. She glanced down, then her eyes met mine. For a moment, she just looked at the papers, and then her lower lip began to tremble. Her eyes welled up, glistening, and a single tear tracked a path down her cheek. I, I know," she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. It's just, I feel so worthless, you know? Without a job, without my own income, I feel like a burden. These little things." She gestured vaguely at the statements. "They just make me feel normal. Like I'm still the self. Like I'm not just nothing." Guilt washed over me, swift and powerful. The sting of her tears was immediate, far more impactful than any number on a spreadsheet. I hadn't meant to make her feel worse, to add to her burden. I hated seeing her cry. No, Clara, it's okay," I quickly said, reaching across the table to cover her hand with mine. "I understand, I really do. I wish you'd told me. Maybe just give me a heads up on the bigger stuff, okay? We're a team, remember?" Crisis averted. Her tears dried, replaced by a grateful squeeze of my hand. She promised to be more mindful, to communicate better. I told myself that was enough, but a nagging feeling, a small persistent pebble, remained lodged deep in my gut. Her days settled into a new routine. She'd sleep in late, often until past 9, sometimes 10. I'd be at work, already halfway through my morning code. When I called during my lunch break, she'd usually be just getting up or having some coffee. Hours were spent on her phone, scrolling, texting, whatever it was people did. In the afternoons, she'd often meet friends for coffee, sometimes a light lunch. "Just keeping my spirits up," she'd explain later, casually. "Being around people helps." Evenings, especially weekends, became a blur of her going out. "The girls need me," she'd say, applying her lipstick carefully in front of the mirror. "We're just blowing off some steam. It's important to have some fun, right?" Happy hours stretched into dinners, then into late-night drinks. I'd often wake up alone, the apartment silent save for the hum of the refrigerator. A text message would usually be waiting. "Staying at Beth's, too late to drive. See you in the morning," or "Crashing at Jessica's, went a little crazy. LOL. I tried to push away the tendrils of jealousy, the whispers of suspicion. She needed her friends. She needed to have fun. Her life had been turned upside down. She deserved a break. I told myself these things repeatedly, a mantra against the growing unease. I wanted to be understanding, supportive, the good boyfriend. The job search, however, seemed to have stalled entirely. When I'd ask, she'd offer vague answers, a suave, a dismissive wave of her hand. "The industry is just so competitive right now, Ethan. You wouldn't believe it." Or, "I'm still developing opportunities, you know? It's not an overnight thing." She never seemed to have an interview lined up, never mentioned a specific company she was excited about. It was always a general sense of being busy without any tangible results. I'd sit alone in the apartment in the evenings, the city hum a low thrum outside the window. The stack of bills on the corner of the counter grew, a silent accusation. I'd stare at them, then at the empty side of the sofa, the colorful throw blanket folded neatly where she usually sat. A hollow feeling began to spread in my chest, a slow, quiet wonder about everything. The night had been restless, a tangled knot of half-sleep and vague unease. Something was gnawing at me, a low-level hum of anxiety I couldn't quite identify. I woke before the alarm, the early morning light barely filtering through the blinds. Clara was still sound asleep beside me, her breathing soft and even. I lay there for a moment, listening to the quiet of the apartment, and then I heard it, a soft, persistent buzzing. Her phone, on the kitchen counter, a steady stream of notifications, small vibrations against the polished quartz. My stomach dropped, a cold, leaden weight. I knew instinctively that this was the source of my unease. I swung my legs out of bed, careful not to disturb her, and walked into the kitchen. The phone buzzed again, lighting up the screen. I hesitated, my hand hovering over it. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, to turn away, to preserve the fragile peace. but the persistent buzzing, the sheer volume of notifications, compelled me. I picked it up. A text message banner flashed across the screen, a brief, sharp incision into my calm. It was from a contact simply labeled client. The message read, "Miss you, can't wait for Friday." My hands started to tremble, a tremor that ran through my entire body. Client. That was what she called her networking opportunities, her developing opportunities. I unlocked the phone, my fingers fumbling slightly, the screen bright in the dim kitchen. The messages opened, a torrent of words and images. It wasn't a client for marketing, not in any professional sense. It was a man, a different kind of client, named Roger. Intimate messages, suggestive photos exchanged, promises of a future, shared secrets that were clearly not mine. The truth hit me, not like a gentle rain, but like a Midwest blizzard, sudden and brutal, freezing everything in its path. All the vague excuses, the late nights, the unexplained purchases, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. I heard Clara stir in the bedroom. My heart hammered against my ribs. I quickly placed the phone back on the counter, trying to compose my face, to push down the cold rage spreading through me, hardening every muscle. Her words, spoken casually months ago, echoed in my memory. Whatever. I don't need you. I have plenty of options. She finally walked into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her hair a mess. She saw her phone on the counter, still lit up. Then she saw my face. The silence that followed was deafening, a thick, suffocating blanket. She looked from the phone to me, a flicker of understanding, then dread, clouding her features. "Who is Roger?" I asked, my voice raw, barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. Her eyes widened in terror and disbelief. What are you talking about?" she stammered, her gaze darting to the phone. She lunged forward, trying to snatch it, to erase the evidence. But it was too late. I blocked her, my hands slamming down on the counter next to it. "Don't," I said, my voice rising, gaining strength with every word. "Don't you dare." I saw it all, Clara. The messages, the photos, the lies. The confrontation exploded then, a bitter detonation in the quiet morning. Accusations spilled from my lips, each one laced with the pain of betrayal. Denials, sharp and desperate, spewed from hers. Everything I thought was real, everything we had built, shattered into a million irreparable pieces around us. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Clara moved like a hurricane through the small apartment, yanking clothes from the closet, stuffing them haphazardly into a duffel bag. Her face was blotchy, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her eyes blazed with anger. "You had no right, Ethan," she screamed, her voice hoarse, echoing off the walls. "No right to go through my phone. You invaded my privacy." My own voice, when it came, was ragged, laced with a pain that felt physical. "No right? You live off me, Clara. You lie to me. You cheat on me, right here in my apartment, on my dimame." The words burned in my throat, each one a shard of glass. "What about my rights? What about my privacy?" She didn't answer, just slammed the duffel bag shut, the sound sharp and final. She grabbed her purse, her keys, her eyes never leaving mine, filled with a venomous contempt. At the door, she paused, her hand on the knob. "You know what?" she spat, her voice cold, cutting. "I never loved you. Not really. You were just convenient, a safe place to land." Then she was gone, the door slamming shut, rattling the fragile silence. I stood there in the suddenly empty apartment, the lingering scent of her jasmine and vanilla perfume now a bitter mockery. It clung to the air, a cruel phantom. My legs felt like lead, my chest hollowed out. I slowly moved to the sofa, collapsing onto it, staring at the ceiling. The ceiling fan spun lazily above me, its blades a hypnotic blur. An emptiness settled over me, a vast, consuming void I'd never known existed. Days blurred into a fog. Work became a distant hum, something I went through the motions of. Meals were takeout cartons, left uneaten on the coffee table. Sleep was a foreign concept, replaced by endless, staring nights. The apartment, once enlivened by her colorful things, now felt sterile, cold, haunted. My phone rang occasionally. It was usually Mike, his voice laced with concern. "Hey man, you doing okay? Haven't heard from you." I gave him vague answers, mumbled something about needing space, feeling under the weather. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth, not yet. As the bong slowly began to lift, a new clarity settled in, sharp and painful. I started to notice things, small details I'd dismissed or ignored before. The expensive earrings Clara always wore, the ones she said were a gift from her aunt. The designer bag she carried, a sale find. The new phone she'd bought a few months ago, a work necessity. Each item, once innocent, now pulsed with a sinister light. I began to piece together a timeline, revisiting old memories, old conversations. The networking lunches with colleagues who were never quite named. The late nights out with the girls that stretched into mornings. The dramatic sighs about the soul-crushing job market. It all connected, a mosaic of deceit. How long had this been going on? Months? Before she moved in? The thought made my stomach churn. The convenience she had spoken of. It wasn't just my apartment, my financial stability. It was a cover, a carefully constructed illusion. Despair, once a heavy cloak, slowly receded, replaced by a cold, hard anger. It wasn't the explosive rage of our last conversation, but something deeper, more insidious. It was a calculated fury, a quiet, simmering resentment that settled into my bones. I remembered something I'd heard once, a phrase that had always struck me as harsh, but now resonated with a chilling logic. Everyone has to pay the price. The idea, once a fleeting thought, now took root. The investigation began not out of malice, but from a desperate, consuming need for understanding. And yet, yes, for justice. Not legal justice, but a moral reckoning. I needed to know the full extent of the lie to piece together the shattered fragments of my perception. I started subtly. One afternoon during a coffee break, I approached Mike. "Hey, you know how Clara used to work in marketing?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Did she ever mention working with anyone named Roger? Just curious about old colleagues." Mike thought for a moment. "Roger? Yeah, I think so. Roger Harrison, right? Big shot over at Sterling and Finch. Senior partner, I think. Why?" I shrugged, feigning disinterest. Just heard his name pop up. Small world. Roger Harrison, the name lodged in my mind. Next, I tackled the credit card statements. This time, I didn't just scan them, I scrutinized every line item. I pulled out a highlighter, marking every charge that clearly wasn't mine, every expense that seemed frivolous or out of place for a woman supposedly struggling to find work. The list grew longer than I'd anticipated. Designer clothes, high-end cosmetics, salon visits, expensive meals at places I'd never been. And then I saw it. Multiple charges from the Grand Central Hotel, a luxury establishment downtown, spanning several months. A chill ran down my spine. I dug through my old emails, searching for anything, any stray piece of information. I found a receipt for a weekend getaway, a booking confirmation for 2 nights at a bed and breakfast in a charming lakeside town, dated from a few months back. Clara had claimed it was a girls' weekend, one of those late nights at Beth's that stretched into 2. The confirmation clearly stated, 1 room, 2 adults. The date matched perfectly with one of those unexplained absences. The next step was more deliberate. I contacted my bank, explaining that I needed a full breakdown of all joint expenses over the past year. I needed to know, in cold, hard numbers, how much of my money had been spent to facilitate her double life. The representative was polite, efficient, and non-judgmental. He explained the process for gathering the records. I also did some discreet online research on Roger Harrison. It wasn't hard to find him. A quick search revealed a professional headshot, a LinkedIn profile, and then a local newspaper article about a charity gala. In the accompanying photo, he stood beside a smiling woman and 2 children. Roger Harrison was married, with a family, a prominent figure in the community, with a polished reputation. The pieces clicked together, forming a horrifyingly clear picture. Clara's job search hadn't been a struggle for employment. It had been a smokescreen. The networking lunches, the late nights out, the expensive purchases, all of it had been funded by me, masking her affair with a married man. The realization was sickening, a corrosive truth that ate away at every last shred of trust and affection I had for her. The quiet anger I'd felt before solidified into something concrete. I bought a new encrypted external hard drive. I started meticulously documenting everything: text messages, photos, screenshots from her phone, taken in the brief moment of truth, financial records, dates, times, locations from my own memory. Each piece of evidence was carefully cataloged, a digital ledger of her deceit. The plan for moral consequences began to form, not a rash, emotional outburst, but a carefully constructed unraveling. The first step was a lawyer. I found Brenda at a small firm downtown, recommended by a colleague for her no-nonsense approach. She was a shrewd Midwestern woman, her eyes sharp, her demeanor calm but firm. I laid out my external hard drive on her polished desk, along with printed copies of bank statements, hotel receipts, and the screenshots from Clara's phone. I spoke factually, stripping my voice of any emotion, presenting the evidence like a meticulous prosecutor. Brenda listened, nodding occasionally, making notes in a small pad. When I finished, the silence in her office was heavy. "This is quite a file, Ethan," she said, her voice flat. "You've been thorough." She advised me on the legalities, emphasizing that while direct revenge was risky and could backfire, financial recourse was entirely possible. "Fraudulent inducement to cohabitate, for starters," she explained, "and we can certainly go after the money she spent under false pretenses. As for the other matter," she gestured vaguely at the more intimate details, "that's more about reputation. Legally, we don't have much to pursue there, but there are other avenues for moral consequences." Armed with Brenda's advice, I sent Clara a carefully worded demand letter. It outlined every penny I expected back, from the rent and utilities I'd paid to the car payments and the unrecognized credit card charges. It wasn't just a request, it was a firm expectation, backed by legal threat. The quiet anger that had been simmering within me found a precise, actionable outlet. Simultaneously, I made a subtle move. I reached out to a mutual acquaintance within the local tech community, someone known for their loose lips and wide network. I mentioned very casually how strange it was that Clara had networked so extensively with Roger Harrison from Sterling and Finch, especially considering he was a married man. I expressed vague concern for professional ethics and the optics of her previous employment situation. I knew it would spread. The tech community here was small, and gossip traveled fast, especially when it involved someone as prominent as Roger. The news, as expected, spread like wildfire. Within days, whispers reached Roger's firm: corporate ethics, conflict of interest. The charges on my credit card statements, particularly those from the Grand Central Hotel, tied directly to Roger's known business travel. The discreet inquiries began, and then the ultimate consequence. The news of Roger's affair and Clara's involvement reached his wife. The fallout was swift and brutal. Roger faced an immediate internal corporate investigation, his reputation, once pristine, now under a harsh spotlight. His marriage, from what I later heard, was shattered, divorce proceedings inevitable. Clara's world had also imploded. Her reputation, such as it was, lay in tatters within her professional circle. Her options, the ones she'd so casually mentioned, evaporated. No one in the industry wanted to touch her now. Then my phone rang. It was Clara, her voice frantic, desperate. "Ethan, please, you have to stop this." She pleaded, tears evident in her voice. "I'll pay you back. Everything. Just call off your lawyer. Don't ruin Roger's life. Don't ruin mine." The tables had turned, completely and irrevocably. Her desperation was palpable, a stark contrast to her earlier arrogance. I held firm, my resolve unyielding. "You will repay every cent, Clara," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "And that includes compensation for the emotional distress. You made your choices. Now you pay the price." Clara, stripped of her pride and her options, eventually agreed to the settlement. There was no real fight left in her. Facing legal action and public ruin, her only path was compliance. She found a low-paying job, far removed from her previous aspirations, and began the slow, arduous process of repaying me. Each small transfer to my account was a testament to the price she was paying, a tangible measure of her downfall. It was a meager trickle, a stark contrast to the flood of my own money she had once spent, but it was coming. Roger's career took a massive hit. The whispers in the community turned into outright discussions. His prominent position became untenable, his reputation irrevocably stained. His marriage, as Brenda later confirmed, did indeed teeter on the brink, the scandal too much for his wife to simply ignore. He became a cautionary tale, a public example of a private betrayal. I watched it all unfold from a distance, through the thin veil of community gossip and Brenda's updates. There was a satisfaction, certainly in seeing justice served, in knowing that the deceit had been exposed and the consequences meted out. But that satisfaction was tempered by a profound sadness. It was a hollow victory, built on the ashes of something I had once believed in. The thrill of revenge had given way to a weary understanding of human frailty. I realized then that while I had wanted revenge, what I truly needed was closure and the restoration of my own dignity. To know that I hadn't just been a fool, that the truth could eventually surface. That lesson was hard won. One quiet Saturday, months after she'd left, I finally cleared out the last of Clara's things. A forgotten hair tie behind the bathroom sink, a stray earring under the bed, a brightly colored tea towel she'd bought, tucked in a drawer. I gathered them all, placed them in a small box, and left it by the curb. The apartment, once vibrant with her presence, now felt truly mine again. It was emptier, yes, but also lighter, free from the weight of deceit. I started therapy, a quiet weekly hour to unpack the trauma, to process the betrayal, the anger, and even my own part in it, the convenient blindness, the willingness to ignore the warning signs because the alternative was too painful. It was a hard look in the mirror, but a necessary one.